Mile 13. What goes around comes around. Remember, karma's a bitch. Mark, in his gleaming Mercedes, sped across the Eads Bridge, whistling along to the radio as he headed to work. Today, his company was welcoming a new chief business officer. The grapevine had it that she was the chairman's daughter, recently returned from studying in America, planning to assist her father in business. Mark had heard the whispers for months, brilliant and beautiful. He'd never met her, so he'd come in early, eager to see for himself. His new car sped along his usual route. Familiar streetlights blurred, and the scraggly, wind-beaten trees lining the median remained a constant, unmoving backdrop. He glanced to his left, noticing something new. A fresh mile marker, a stark, deep blue sign reading Mile 13, stood oddly, almost grotesquely, planted in the middle of the bridge's median. He chuckled to himself. Those DOT guys must be bored, he muttered. Putting up a marker in the middle of the bridge? Bunch of slackers. The sign flashed past, and he smiled again, thinking of the world's absurdities. He glanced at his watch. Lost in thought, he was already cutting it close to work. He floored it, the mile markers blurring past as his thoughts raced until the company gates appeared before him. At the gate, the security guard, Dale, opened the door with a wide smile. "Early bird today, Mark," Dale chirped. Mark offered a curt smile in response. He detested these sycophants. Dale fawned over everyone, always trying to ingratiate himself. Yet he was stuck as a lowly security guard. And who was Dale to try to get friendly with him? He was the director of human resources, after all. He strode into the company, leaving Dale still beaming at other arriving employees. In the conference room, everyone was already assembled, waiting for him. Thankfully, the chairman wasn't there yet. Mark sat in his usual seat, a familiar sense of pride washing over him. Second in command, only the chairman ranked above him. Below him were all the department heads. He was the chairman's right-hand man. Today, the chairman was adding a left hand, his daughter, who would be Mark's equal. He secretly rejoiced, maintaining a serious demeanor. He considered his position. Getting close to the chairman's beautiful daughter would be easy. A plan formed in his mind, a plan to change his life. Then Mr. Thompson, the chairman, entered, followed by a woman of about 25. At first glance, Mark was stunned by her beauty, captivating, mesmerizing. Every eye in the room was on her, tall and slender with flawless skin, a perfectly symmetrical face, and her hair neatly tied up. She radiated an elegance that drew all eyes. After a moment of stunned silence, Mr. Thompson broke the ice. "I'd like to introduce everyone to Ava, our new chief business officer. Let's give Ava a warm welcome to our company family." A round of applause erupted, accompanied by murmurs of praise. Ava, composed and slightly shy, stood to speak. "Hello, everyone. I'm very happy and honored to be here working with all of you. I hope you'll all help me as I work to help grow our company." She bowed slightly. Everyone noticed her approachable and unpretentious manner. As she looked up from her bow, her eyes met Mark's intense gaze. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked away, leaving Mark with a glimpse of a captivating smile. In that instant, an idea solidified in his mind. He had to win over the chairman's daughter if he wanted to change his life. The introduction meeting was short. That afternoon, while daydreaming about Ava's face and smile, Mark's phone rang. "Hello? This is Mark." A voice responded, "Mark, it's Mr. Thompson. Are you free? I need you to drive me to lunch." Mark didn't hear the rest of the conversation clearly, only his own continuous "yes, sirs," and nodding along. He hung up, leaned back in his chair, and grinned to himself. At 11:45 a.m., he parked in front of the company building. Moments later, he saw Ava and her father step out. Ava held an umbrella over her father's head and opened the car door, but not before giving Mark a sly smile. He knew his charm had worked. He reveled in his success. He drove them to a renowned restaurant downtown. Mr. Thompson was relaxed and casual, treating Mark almost like family, solidifying Mark's resolve to win Ava over. After launch, Mark drove Mr. Thompson home, and Ava went with him to meet a major client. He could have gone alone, but Mark's shrewd mind saw this as a golden opportunity. On the drive, he regaled Ava with stories, making her laugh, charming her effortlessly. Ava, gentle as the morning sun, enjoyed his conversation. Abruptly, he asked, "Ava, do you have a boyfriend?" Ava blushed and smiled. "No, why the sudden question?" Silence descended. They sat in the car, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Mark turned to her. "Do you have a business card? I'll introduce you to the client. It'll be easier if they can contact you directly." That was merely a pretext. He really wanted her number to start executing his plan. Unaware of his grand scheme, she handed him her card, which he pocketed. The car sped down the sun-drenched street. "Ava, it's Mark." "Hi, Mark. Who is this?" "It's me. Are you doing anything this Saturday night?" "No, I'm home alone. I'm new to the country and don't have many friends yet. Do you like horror movies? I wasn't sure, so I called to ask. If you do, I'd like to take you." After a moment of silence, Ava agreed to go to a movie with Mark. A thrill ran through her. Perhaps she had secretly admired Mark's charm. Time flew by. They were officially a couple. They were inseparable, Ava completely smitten with Mark. She loved his looks, his wealth, and his charm. People say women fall in love with their ears, and it was true. What was bound to happen, happened. She gave herself to him one night after a drunken outing, in his car. She believed she was experiencing true love and happiness, unaware that Mark was methodically executing his plan. A grand scheme to become the son-in-law of the chairman and gain his wealth. He didn't love her. He was using her to obtain her father's fortune. Ava, blissfully unaware, loved him completely. Mark's predatory nature constantly urged him to pursue other women. Even with Ava by his side, he continued his affairs. One day, while at a coffee shop, he met Sarah, a waitress. Sarah was strikingly beautiful and attracted everyone's attention. Her beauty couldn't escape Mark's notice, and like many times before, he charmed and seduced her. Sarah fell for his charms and material gifts. Unlike Ava, Sarah possessed a gentle, wholesome beauty, a refreshing change for Mark, and he genuinely fell in love with her. Unlike his calculated relationship with Ava, he juggled both relationships, proud of his duplicity. He would often sit and smile to himself, supremely self-satisfied. Then one day, he received a text and a photo from Sarah, a pregnancy test showing 2 lines and a message. "I'm pregnant. What are we going to do? We should get married." He felt a cold dread wash over him. How could this happen? He had always been careful. He was panicked, terrified that everything would unravel. What was he going to do? After some thought, he took a deep breath and called Sarah, suggesting they meet by the river, their usual clandestine meeting place. That evening, after work, he went straight to meet Sarah, without even going home. She was already there, waiting, overjoyed to see him, eager to share the news of her pregnancy. She loved him, despite knowing about Ava. Her love blinded her. She was willing to share him with another woman. She thought that carrying his child would make him love her, would make him leave Ava and marry her. But she was wrong. Mark arrived, his expression unchanged, not smiling as he usually did. This extinguished the smile that had just begun to bloom on Sarah's face. He stood there, silent, staring at the murky river. An uncomfortable silence hung between them. A wall existed between them. That wall was the growing life in Sarah's womb. Sarah stood silently, sensing something was wrong. He took a deep breath, trying to appear natural, then turned to Sarah after a moment of silence. His gaze made her realize he was a stranger, not the gentle, romantic man she loved. She was completely unprepared for his question. "Have you thought this through? Do you really want to marry me?" She was surprised by the question. It seemed to be what she wanted, yet something felt wrong. This translation maintains the original's tone while making the characters and setting much more relatable to American readers. Adding more specific details about the setting and characters would further enrich the story. "I'll marry you, Sarah. I'll take care of you and the baby." At his words, Sarah's emotions overflowed. Happiness washed away her doubts. She hugged him tightly, as if afraid that if she loosened her grip, the river would sweep away their love. He whispered in her ear, "I'll love and care for you and the baby. Don't worry." He smiled a tender smile, but a keen observer would have noted something strange in his eyes. "Come on, let's go eat. I'm starving. I skipped dinner," he murmured. Sarah, like a wet cat seeking comfort, followed him to a luxurious restaurant. They ordered a lavish meal, an expensive bottle of wine, and all Sarah's favorite dishes. She was lost in happiness. It seemed as though fate was finally being kind to her. After so much struggle, she had Mark, and he genuinely loved her. They would be together, she thought happily. She ate heartily, perhaps a bit too much. Mark kept refilling her wine glass until she was pleasantly tipsy. He helped her into the car and drove her home, taking her to his bedroom. She drifted off to sleep, her mind hazy with wine and love. He gently caressed her, loving her as if it were their first time together. In that same bedroom, they were lost in each other's embrace. But no one could have guessed what happened after they made love. Mark let Sarah sleep. He quietly got out of bed and cut a length of thin cord from the curtain. He wrapped it tightly around his strong hands and approached the sleeping Sarah. He hesitated. Then his eyes blazed with cold fury and determination. The devil within him took over. He approached her, looping the cord around her white neck as she breathed softly in her sleep. Her pulse throbbed in her neck. Sarah was unaware of his intentions. She slept peacefully, lost in the afterglow of passion. Then he tightened his grip, pinning her down, the cord constricting her throat. He used all his strength to tighten the cruel cord. It was too late. Sarah struggled, clawed at his hands, and tried to loosen the cord, but to no avail. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Bloodshot, her eyes reflected rage and hatred. The man she loved, the man who had brutally murdered her and her unborn child, was before her. It was only now, too late, that she understood. In her final moments, she struggled and clawed, desperate to escape. But a woman's strength was no match for the murderous strength of the man. That dinner was her last, that wine her farewell drink, and their passionate lovemaking, a final mercy before he killed her. He sat on top of her, his hands tightening around her neck, his eyes blazing with rage. "You have to die. You can't use that cursed thing in your belly to threaten me, to ruin my plans. You wouldn't have died if you weren't pregnant. Let me send you to hell earlier. You have no right to ruin my plans." He strangled her until she stopped moving. Before him lay her naked, still warm body, eyes wide open, staring at him. Those eyes contained intense hatred. Those eyes would follow him forever, a silent curse. He sat there, drenched in sweat, feeling an icy chill. He had just killed someone, 2 people actually. It was cold. He started shivering, though sweat poured from him. The silence was unnerving. He felt as if he could hear the bones of her corpse stiffening. Panic set in. He was in deep trouble. What was he going to do? He paced the room, tearing at his hair, racking his brain. He had to make this disappear. Otherwise, he was finished. How was he going to dispose of the body? Then, a flash of inspiration. A horrific idea he'd never considered before. An idea from a horror movie he had seen. In Ava's bedroom, the nightlight flickered wildly before going out. The room was plunged into darkness, only the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the window. The wind howled, rattling the windows. A storm was brewing, a violent storm after days of drought. The wind whistled through the trees, sounding like the wails of tormented spirits. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated Ava's room, startling her awake from a terrifying nightmare. She had just dreamt of a man murdering a woman after making love to her. The woman died in agonizing struggle. The killer's eyes burned with an inhuman rage, and the dying woman's eyes held a look of furious resentment. Even in her dream, Ava couldn't forget that look. "Why is it so dark?" I remember turning on the night light. She reached out, trying to switch on the night light. It didn't work. The storm raged outside. Ava felt a chilling dread, not just from the nightmare, but because the room felt so cold, as though some supernatural force were present. Rain lashed against the window. Mustering her courage, she rose to close the window. As she approached, she looked out into the yard and saw the shadowy figure of a woman in white, drenched in rain. She rubbed her eyes, trying to focus. A flash of lightning made her jump. The lightning momentarily illuminated the yard, and the figure was gone. Although she told herself it was sleepiness or an illusion, Ava was terrified. As she closed the window and turned around, she screamed. Before her was a woman with long, flowing hair obscuring her face, dressed in a white, drenched dress, reaching for Ava's throat. This translation continues the dark tone and plot while keeping the setting and character names consistent with the Americanized version. The suspenseful and horrific elements of the original are maintained to keep the reader engaged and disturbed. "Dad, there's a ghost. Daddy, there's a ghost." Hearing her daughter's screams, Mr. Thompson rushed in from the next room, bursting through the door and switching on the light, illuminating the room. Strangely, the light worked perfectly now. Ava had tried to turn it on earlier without success. He found Ava huddled under the covers, sobbing hysterically. Rainwater streamed in through the open window, forming puddles on the floor. Mr. Thompson rushed to her, comforting her. "It's okay, sweetie, Daddy's here." Ava clung to him like a drowning person grasping at a life raft, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daddy, there was a ghost. I was so scared." Mr. Thompson tried to reassure her. "Honey, you've been working too hard. It was probably just your imagination. There are no ghosts in our house. Don't worry, I'm here." Ava, between sobs, recounted her experience. "Daddy, the ghost was terrifying. She was wearing a white dress, her hair wet and hanging down. She tried to strangle me. I was so scared. The rain was so heavy, and the power went out. When I was closing the window, I saw her in the yard. Then, she appeared in the room. She was standing over there. I was so terrified." Mr. Thompson didn't know what to say, only offering comfort. There, it's all right, honey. I'm here." With her father beside her, Ava felt safer. She snuggled against him, falling asleep from exhaustion and fear. Outside, the rain continued to fall heavily. A shadowy white figure stood silently in the rain, staring at Ava's window. After a moment, the figure faded and disappeared into the downpour. Seeing Ava asleep, Mr. Thompson gently laid her down, carefully tucking her in and dimming the nightlight. He quietly closed the door and returned to his room, pondering the incident. Who was that ghost? Why was it haunting Ava? A successful businessman and a staunch materialist, he didn't believe in ghosts. He assumed Ava's stressful job had caused her to hallucinate. He told himself he would reduce her workload and pay more attention to her. He switched off the lights and went to bed. It was already past midnight. At 2 a.m., a phone call startled Ava awake. The lingering fear from her encounter with the ghost made her jump. Although she'd begun to convince herself it was an hallucination, she reached for her phone. It was Mark. Strange. Why was he calling so late? "Hello? Mark, what's wrong? It's so late." It was Mark, but his voice was unlike his usual calm demeanor. It was filled with panic, a fact Ava immediately noticed. The events of the night and Mark's urgent call created an ominous feeling within her. Before she could ask what was wrong, he hung up. After a moment's hesitation, Ava decided to drive to Mark's house. She loved and worried about him. She would go no matter what. She quickly threw on a jacket, grabbed her phone and keys, and drove off into the night. Mr. Thompson, unable to sleep, heard Ava's car starting in the garage. He was startled and concerned, wanting to ask her where she was going. But before he could act, she sped away. He was uneasy about her strange behavior. After a moment's thought, despite the torrential rain, he put on his coat and rain gear, got on his motorcycle, and quietly followed Ava. The storm was intense. It felt like a hurricane. Ava drove down a deserted street, the yellow streetlights blurred by the rain, making the road seem vast, desolate, and cold. She pressed the accelerator, speeding through the night, leaving the whiteout of rain behind her. She arrived at Mark's house. Instead of ringing the doorbell, she called him discreetly, fearing that noise would attract attention. She waited. After a moment, Mark answered. "Mark, I'm here. Come open the door." His voice was both relieved and urgent. "Wait a minute. I'll be right there." A moment later, Mark opened the gate, carrying a large, heavy-looking burlap sack over his shoulder. Ava was about to ask what it was when he interrupted. "Open the trunk. Hurry." Though confused, she held her umbrella in one hand and opened the trunk with the other as he instructed. After he tossed the sack into the trunk, he said, "Wait a second. It's heavy. There's more." Ava turned to him. "It's really heavy. Let me help you." Even without knowing what was in the bag, Ava had seen Mark struggling under its weight in the rain. She couldn't just stand there and watch. She loved him deeply. Without saying a word, she went into the house. As they disappeared behind the gate, a shadowy figure watched them from a distance. Mr. Thompson. Although curious, he remained hidden behind a large tree, observing. The moment Ava stepped inside Mark's house, a chill ran down her spine. The house felt deserted, cold, and gloomy, sending shivers down her spine. Mark led her to the bathroom where another, smaller sack sat. He turned to Ava. "Help me with this one." Ava didn't respond, silently approaching. Again, a chill ran down her spine, making her skin crawl. The damp, slimy feel of the burlap sack, combined with the pungent, fishy smell of the bathroom, filled her with a sense of foreboding. She wanted to ask Mark what was in the sacks but hesitated, afraid of angering him. Right now, Mark was everything to her. Love, happiness. For his sake, she would do anything without question. Together, they heaved the second sack into the trunk. As Mark closed the trunk, a flash of lightning illuminated his cruel face. His expression was terrifyingly calm and cold. He got in the car and drove away. The rain intensified, the wind howling like a mournful wail in the stormy darkness. The thunder roared, terrifying anyone caught in the tempest. Yet, Mark thought only of the bridge on his usual commute. It would be deserted at this hour. The perfect place, he thought. Just dump the sacks and be done with it. No one would know. In a few days, the sacks would wash ashore, and he would be in the clear. He glanced at his watch. It was after 3 a.m. He pressed the accelerator, speeding through the storm. Ava and Mark remained silent during the drive, each lost in their own thoughts. In less than 15 minutes, Mark reached the familiar bridge. The mile marker, mile 13, its white numbers on a blue background, appeared ghostly and eerie in the rain-swept headlights. In the middle of the bridge, Mark slowed, noticing the dark figure in a raincoat, motorcycle headlights off, who had been following them from a distance. The raincoat obscured the figure's identity, making it unrecognizable to Mark and Ava. Mr. Thompson had been silently observing their actions from a safe distance. Mark stopped. He got out, Ava following. He turned, and a flash of lightning illuminated his face, transforming his once charming features into a cold, emotionless mask. His eyes were frighteningly sharp. Ava held an umbrella over him as he heaved the first sack from the trunk. He walked to the bridge's railing and tossed it into the river. He did the same with the second sack, but this one felt significantly heavier. He struggled to lift it. Seeing his difficulty, Ava helped him lift it to the railing. Finally, he tossed it into the river, feeling no remorse. He brushed his hands together and smirked. As far as he was concerned, it was over. No one would ever know. Suddenly, as they watched the sacks float away, a flash of lightning illuminated the killer's face, the unwitting accomplice's face, and the shadowy figure who had witnessed everything. The mile marker, mile 13, was clearly visible. The rain fell like tears, a mournful cry, the wind a howl of rage against the callous killer, the man who had allowed the woman he loved to die. He was no longer human. He was a devil in disguise, unimaginably cruel. He would pay for his actions. He calmly got back in the car and drove away. At 5 a.m., Ava drove Mark home. She had many questions, but she held them back. The car pulled up to Mark's mansion. The rain had subsided. Dawn broke, painting the sky with blood-red hues. The killer waved goodbye to his unwitting accomplice. Ava drove home. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw Mr. Thompson exercising in the yard. He'd been waiting for her. Seeing her car, he spoke. "Ava, where have you been all night?" Ava hesitated, then told her father about Mark's call and her visit. She omitted the part about throwing the sacks into the river. Even without her confession, Mr. Thompson knew what had happened. He was simply trying to determine the contents of the sacks. Ava was clearly unaware. Exhausted from a sleepless night, she went to bed. Mr. Thompson remained, lost in anxious thought and troubled by unanswered questions. Lost in thought, his phone rang. "Mark, this is Mr. Thompson." "Yes, sir. I'm calling to take a few days off. I'm sick. I got caught in the rain last night and have a bad cold." Mr. Thompson was consumed with doubt about Mark. He was a giant question mark. After witnessing what he'd done, the thought of Ava marrying Mark and inheriting his company was unthinkable. He had to get to the bottom of things. "Oh, you're sick? How bad is it? Take some time off. I'll assign someone else to your work. Get some rest and feel better soon." Mark offered a sweet "yes, sir," and hung up. Mr. Thompson sighed, deep in thought. He went inside. After calling in sick, Mark went to the refrigerator, retrieved a small glass jar wrapped in a black plastic bag, and drove off. In Ava's bedroom, she drifted off to sleep, exhausted from a sleepless night. Between wakefulness and sleep, she found herself in a dark room. A storm raged outside. In the dim light, she saw two figures on a bed in the corner of the room. They were making love. Then the woman fell asleep. She saw the man take a cord and strangle the woman. She struggled, clawed, but couldn't escape. Then everything went silent. Ava watched in horror as the man took the woman's life. She wanted to scream, but her limbs were paralyzed, her mouth frozen. A supernatural force seemed to be making her witness this scene. A flash of lightning illuminated the room. She saw the stiff, naked body of a woman on the bed, her eyes wide open, bloodshot. The killer slowly turned to look at her. In the dim light of the stormy room, she clearly saw Mark's face, the face of the man she loved blindly, the face of a killer. He stared at her, his eyes devoid of love, filled with cold rage. He smiled, a grotesque smile echoing in the silent night. The eerie laughter, mixed with the storm outside, sent a chill down her spine. Ava struggled to escape the nightmare. She felt revulsion, revulsion for the man she loved, revulsion for the cold-blooded killer. Then, everything started to fade. A flash of lightning jolted her awake. She was standing in a bathroom. The floor was covered in blood. She saw Mark using a butcher knife from the kitchen, dismembering the body. The sound of the knife cutting through bone was horrifying. First, the feet, then the knees, the thighs, the hands, the elbows, the arms. Finally, the head. From a distance, she saw Mark holding the bloody hair with one hand and using the knife to sever the head. The head rolled to the corner, blood pooling on the floor. He took a smaller knife, cutting open the woman's abdomen. He worked brutally, blood flowing freely. He reached into the abdomen, pulling out a bloody fetus. The fetus was grotesque. Ava saw Mark put the fetus into the glass jar. Blood smeared across his hands. Then, he reached into the woman's chest, removing her still warm heart. He put the heart into the jar, wrapped it carefully, and put it in the refrigerator. He took 2 large sacks, placing the head and limbs in one, the torso in the other. Then, he washed away the blood. He took out his phone and made a call. Moments later, Ava saw herself helping Mark carry the sacks to the car and drive to the bridge, where he threw them into the river. It was all like a slow-motion movie. The characters were Mark and herself. Ava struggled to wake herself, but some unseen force compelled her to witness everything. A voice echoed from somewhere distant. "Blood debt must be paid with blood. You aided evil. You will pay the price." A chilling laugh followed. Ava jolted awake. Terrified, She called out for her father. "Dad? Dad?" No answer. She thought he must be at work. She checked her phone and saw a message from her father. "I saw you were tired, so I let you sleep. I'll delegate your work. Try to rest. I'm gonna meet a client tonight and we'll be late. Have dinner before I get back." After reading her father's message, Ava felt fear, not only from the bizarre dream, but from a chilling feeling of being watched, of something following her. She felt terrified and alone, utterly alone in her own house. From a distance, Mr. Thompson watched the gate of Mark's mansion. As the gate opened and Mark drove away, he followed discreetly. Mark drove through several city alleys and stopped in front of an old house on street name E.G. Pine Street. It was an old mansion, its walls covered with ivy. Mr. Thompson maintained a safe distance, remaining unseen. Mark got out and rang the doorbell, carrying the jar wrapped in a black plastic bag. He was greeted by Mr. Lee, a renowned shaman. Mr. Lee smirked, inviting Mark inside. Once inside, Mark said, "Sir, I've obtained everything you requested. Please help me complete the plan. Help me achieve wealth and prosperity." The shaman chuckled. "Don't worry, I will help you. Just make sure you keep your end of the bargain." Mark said with a smile, "Don't worry. After this is done, you won't be cheated." The shaman led Mark into his shrine room. The room was dimly lit, incense burning, and the walls were adorned with bizarre, demonic figures. He took the jar, revealing a blackened heart and a shriveled, dried-up fetus. He placed the jar on the altar, lit incense, and began to mutter incantations. Then he took a knife and said to Mark, "Now you must make a pact with the spirits. Use your own blood. After 49 days, the spirits will be at your command, and you will achieve your goals easily." Mark, following the shaman's instructions, took the knife and cut his finger, dripping 3 drops of blood into the jar. Strangely, the fresh blood instantly dried up and disappeared as if absorbed by the fetus and heart. The shaman took a piece of gold silk, dipped a brush in vermilion ink, and painted a charm. He muttered incantations in a language Mark didn't understand. Once finished, he affixed the charm to the jar and covered it with a red cloth. Back in the living room, the shaman turned to Mark. "This is between you and me. Go home now. In 49 days, the spirit child will be fully formed, and it will help you achieve your aims. If needed, I'll call you." Mark left, feeling no remorse for his crimes. Instead, he felt a surge of anticipation. In a few days, with the spirit child at his command, he could use it to achieve his goals. He thought, "I'm in too deep now. To change my life, I have to see this through. With the spirits on my side, what could possibly go wrong?" He drove home. At Ava's house, after reading her father's message, she went downstairs, made some food, and returned to bed. She felt tired, perhaps from being out in the rain all night. She fell into a feverish sleep. In her feverish dreams, she heard a woman's mournful cries echoing through the empty house, the sounds blending with the silence of the night. Then, she heard the cries of a newborn baby, a heart-wrenching sound of despair. A woman's voice sang a lullaby. "Ah, ah, 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 ah. Sleep now, my child, sleep tight, while mother bears her endless plight. Human hearts are dark and deep, karma's wheel its secrets keep. Ah, 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 ah." In the quiet of the night, the lullaby was a lament, a reminder of karma. Ava opened her eyes. Her room was plunged into darkness. She reached for the light switch. It didn't work. In the corner near the window, she saw the hazy figure of a woman holding a baby. The lullaby continued. Ava focused. She saw a woman in white near the window, holding a crying baby. But Ava heard the cries as if from a great distance. Suddenly, the lullaby and the baby's cries stopped. A terrifying silence filled the room. Then, Ava heard a cracking sound, like breaking bones. She was horrified when she saw the figure turn. Her face pale and gaping, blood running from her eyes, her mouth ripped open to her ears. Her long hair obscured her terrifying face. Only her head turned to look at Ava. The rest of her body remained facing the window, still holding the baby. Ava was terrified. She screamed and tried to escape, but the door was locked. She cried out for help, but she was utterly alone. She recognized the face. The corpse from Mark's bedroom, eyes wide open, approaching her. She had seen her in her dreams, and she could never forget her. And the baby, the cursed fetus from the jar. Suddenly, the ghost's body separated, the baby falling onto the floor in front of Ava. It stared at her, its small hands clutching a bloody lump of flesh. It brought the lump to its mouth, sucking on it like a baby nursing. Then its eyes widened with fury. It looked at Ava and laughed. The room was plunged into a darkness filled with the child's demonic laughter. Ava saw 2 burlap sacks floating before her. She tried to scream, but something seemed to be squeezing her throat, stifling her cries. The sacks landed on the floor. A head rolled across the floor, its eyes wide open. A pungent, sickening smell filled the room, making Ava nauseous. Then, she saw 2 arms, hands, feet, and a torso ripped open, its intestines spilling out, slowly reassembling into a human form. It stumbled to the center of the room, its hands grasping its severed head, attaching it to its neck. A complete body, but where its heart should have been was a gaping black hole. It approached Ava, who was pressed against the wall. It raised its hand to strangle her. "Return my life. Return my child's life. Because of your wealth and your father's, I died without a proper burial. You and that bastard threw me in the river. I'm so cold, so cold." The ghost's voice echoed from afar. Ava lunged forward, grabbing anything she could find and throwing it at the ghost. But her efforts were futile. The ghost slowly advanced, Ava sensing the icy cold of death. The ghost's hands tightened in rage. Ava fainted, but she still heard the ghost's chilling laughter. Mr. Thompson arrived home and rang the doorbell repeatedly, but Ava didn't answer. He used his key to open the gate and drive in. He called out, "Ava, what's wrong? Why is it so dark?" There was no answer. A sudden chill made his hair stand on end. Sensing something was wrong, he rushed to her room and burst inside. He switched on the light. The room was in disarray, clothes and furniture scattered everywhere. He ran to her bed and called out, "Ava, what happened?" Ava didn't move. He shook her, but she remained still and silent, like a corpse. Mr. Thompson held her close, checking her pulse. Thankfully, she was still breathing. He frantically called for an ambulance, taking her to the hospital. His mind was racing. Ava was his only child. Since his wife had died giving birth, he devoted himself to raising Ava, and now this. The next morning, at the hospital, Ava woke up in a state of panic. She tore at her clothes and hair, screaming, "My baby! Where is my baby?" Mr. Thompson was overjoyed to see her awake, but her frantic state broke his heart. He called for a doctor. Both Mr. Thompson and the doctor were surprised to see Ava staring out the window, cradling a pillow as if it were a baby, humming a lullaby. As the doctor and nurses approached to take the pillow, Ava became violent, scratching and clawing like a mother protecting her cub. The medical staff and Mr. Thompson had to restrain her and sedate her. Watching Ava lose consciousness, Mr. Thompson's heart ached. He didn't understand what had caused her to suffer so. After examining Ava, the doctor pulled Mr. Thompson aside. Mr. Thompson anxiously asked, "Doctor, what's wrong with my daughter?" The doctor looked at Ava, shaking his head. She suffered a severe nervous breakdown, causing significant brain damage and psychosis. "We've done what we can, but given her condition, I recommend transferring her to a psychiatric hospital for specialized treatment." Mr. Thompson sighed, tears welling in his eyes. He wept for his daughter's fate. His aging eyes looked out the window at the gray sky. 7 days later, Ava was improving physically, but her memory and mental state were still impaired. She often stared out the window, cradling a pillow and humming lullabies. Her eyes were distant and lost. Mark came to visit. Upon seeing him, Ava became agitated. She turned and whispered to the pillow, My baby, your father is here." Then, she stared intently at Mark. Her hair cascaded down, obscuring her face. She tossed the pillow aside and let out a chilling, maniacal laugh. She lunged at him, grabbing his throat. As she strangled him, she screamed, "Give me back my baby! You monster! You murderer! You'll die!" Mark struggled, his face contorted with terror, fighting to break free from Ava's grip. With the help of Mr. Thompson and the nurses, he finally managed to escape. Mr. Thompson pushed Mark out of the room, and he fled in terror, leaving behind Ava's screams and cries. Mark sped home, collapsing onto the sofa. He was terrified. Why had Ava gone mad? Why did she know he'd killed someone? Had Sarah's ghost come back to haunt Ava? He rubbed his temples, staring at the ceiling. He was truly terrified. The entire murder of Sarah replayed in his mind as if it had happened yesterday. He wondered why, a week later, no one had found the sacks he'd thrown into the river. He was racked with a terrible headache. He stumbled toward the refrigerator, grabbing a bottle of hard liquor and ice. He poured a drink and downed it in one gulp. He wanted to get drunk, to forget the throbbing headache, to forget the haunting images he'd been trying to suppress for a week. He poured another drink and drank it just as quickly. He tore at his hair, his mind spinning, trapped in a desperate maze of thoughts. Then, as if remembering something, he reached for his phone, dialed Mr. Lee's number, and pressed call. The long ringing tone irritated him. No one answered. Angrily, he tossed the phone aside and continued drinking. The alcohol coursed through his veins. He began to drift off to sleep. In his drunken stupor, he saw a woman in a white dress standing on the bridge with the mile 13 marker. Her left hand beckoned him, her right hand held a child. A Mercedes sped toward them, striking the woman and child before plunging into the river. The river was stained crimson, filled with the arms of wailing spirits. He saw the woman and child standing on the bridge again, their white figures grinning at him. Their demonic laughter echoed in the darkness. The car sank, disappearing beneath the surface. Mark jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat. The woman in white was Sarah, or rather Sarah's ghost, and the child, the fetus. But the shaman had performed the ritual. How could Sarah and her child's spirits find him? He was overwhelmed with questions. Suddenly, he heard a faint lullaby and muffled sobs echoing through his house. He staggered to his feet, the alcohol clouding his mind. He struggled to stand upright. The room seemed to spin. The neon light flickered wildly. He stumbled up the stairs to the second floor, where the sounds of the lullaby and weeping had originated. Suddenly, silence. A terrifying silence. The bedroom door opened. He saw a naked woman lying on his bed, beckoning him. In a trance, he approached. Then he couldn't believe his eyes. It was Sarah, her eyes wide open, staring at him with immense hatred. Then, a head emerged from under the bed. A child with a grotesque face, dark eyes, and a wide, jagged mouth that seemed ready to devour anything. Its head was adorned with a few tufts of hair and small, newly formed horns. Sarah's body disintegrated. Her head rolled across the floor to Mark's feet. The killer's face was drained of blood. He trembled. He screamed for help, but his cries were swallowed by the silent, gloomy atmosphere of the supernatural world. On the bed was a heap of flesh. Blood stained the sheets and dripped onto the floor. The room reeked of blood. The demonic child held Sarah's heart in its mouth, crawling toward Mark, then laughing maniacally. Sarah's voice echoed, "So you know fear, Mark? Give back my life, my child's life. Blood pays for blood." Then Sarah laughed, a demonic, insane laughter. Mark used all his strength to flee, leaping into his car and speeding away. He was panicked, unsure if it was real or a dream. He was disoriented, pressing the accelerator without knowing where he was going. The car sped on until, inexplicably, it pulled up in front of 606th Street named E.G. Pine Street. It was Mr. Lee's house. Mark turned off the engine, opened the car door, and rang the doorbell, forgetting to close the car door. He waited, but no one answered. He tried the door. It wasn't locked. Surprised, he hurried across the yard and inside. The house was dark. A feeling of fear and dread washed over him. He fumbled around, tripping over something on the floor and falling. Panicked, he found the light switch and turned on the lights. The living room was in disarray, as if ransacked. Blood splattered the walls and floor. Large and small handprints were clearly visible. He followed the trail of blood to the shrine room. He was horrified to find Mr. Lee slumped over in a pool of blood, eyes wide open, hands clutching his throat. His tongue protruded from his mouth, stained crimson. Blood flowed from his mouth, nose, and ears. The shrine room was in chaos. The altar and offerings were smashed. The jar containing the fetus and heart had shattered. The charm and red cloth covering it were half burnt. Mr. Lee had been dead for days. The room reeked of death. In a panic, Mark tried to flee, but the door slammed shut. He struggled to open it, screaming for help, but only heaven could save him now. It was time to pay the price for his sins. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed from behind the altar. "Mark, I miss you so much. Where are you going? Don't run away. Come join me and my child." Then, a burst of maniacal laughter, echoing through the night, piercing Mark's mind. "Spare me. I know what I did. Please spare me." He knelt, begging for mercy. From the shadows behind the altar emerged two demonic figures, one large, one small. The larger one was Sarah's vengeful ghost, transformed by immense rage and injustice. The smaller demon was the half-formed spirit child, likely due to the shaman's insufficient powers. The shaman's death was a just punishment for abetting evil. "Spare you? Mark, while you were killing me, did you think about the consequences? You're worse than an animal. You killed me and my child. You murdered your own child before birth." She lunged, seizing Mark's throat. Her hair stood on end, obscuring his face. Her eyes blazed with fury. Her hands tightened. Then, a blinding light filled the room, emanating from a necklace Mark wore, a necklace his mother had left him. He tore himself free from the room, the darkness pursuing him, trying to pull him back. He leaped into his car, slamming the door shut. Behind him echoed Sarah's voice and maniacal laughter. "Trying to run? Evil begets evil. You can't escape. Your mother saved you once, but she can't save you again." Then came another burst of demonic laughter, echoing into the endless night. This concludes the story, maintaining the suspenseful and horrifying elements while ensuring a smooth and engaging flow for the English-speaking reader. The specific details and evocative language aim to create a truly chilling and memorable narrative. He sped into the night in his Mercedes, his mind racing. He floored it, the car roaring through the downpour, mirroring the night of the murders. He drove aimlessly. Suddenly, he glanced to his right. The familiar sight of the mile 13 marker, its white numbers stark against the dark blue background, appeared. Below, on the bridge, in the stormy night, two ghostly figures loomed, seemingly headed towards him. He heard voices, "Give back our lives! Give back our lives!" He recognized Sarah's ghost and the half-formed spirit child. Without thinking, he sped toward them, screaming, "Die! Die! Leave me alone!" Then, his speeding car swerved, veered off the bridge, and plunged into the river. Within 5 minutes, the car was submerged. The river swallowed the cruel, brutal killer, its waters cleansing themselves with his blood. On the bridge, the two ghostly figures faded into the rain and disappeared. The next morning, a damaged bridge railing and a submerged Mercedes were discovered. Local residents notified the police, who arrived to investigate. After recovering the car, the police found Mark's body, contorted, his eyes wide open, his face frozen in a look of terror. 2 burlap sacks were found floating nearby. Inside, they discovered the decomposing body of a woman. One sack contained her limbs and head, the other her torso, which had been disemboweled, her heart missing. After an investigation, the deceased in the car was identified as Mark, age 26. The cause of death was determined to be alcohol impairment while driving. He crashed through the bridge railing and drowned. The body in the sacks was identified as Sarah, the waitress who disappeared over a week earlier. At the psychiatric hospital, Mr. Thompson sat watching Ava on TV. Due to her unstable mental state, he'd admitted her for treatment. A news report about Mark's death shocked him. The report also mentioned the 2 sacks found in the river. Mr. Thompson pieced together the whole story. He exclaimed, "It's karma, the inevitable consequences of one's actions." He turned to Ava, who was also watching the TV. She laughed maniacally, muttering, "Serves him right, serves him right." Mr. Thompson went to the police station and recounted what he had witnessed. His daughter was insane. Mark was dead. There was no further legal recourse. He retrieved Mark's remains and Sarah's body for burial. Then, he went to a temple, seeking a priest's help in performing a memorial service for Sarah and her child. 49 days after Sarah's death, a 3-day, 3-night memorial service was held on the Mile 13 bridge. Afterward, the priest led a ceremony to guide Sarah and her child's spirits to a peaceful place, preventing them from harming innocents. Mr. Thompson felt a sense of relief. The story was over. The evil had been punished, yet 2 women had suffered, one driven mad by love. Mr. Thompson sold his company and assets. Half went to the temple as an offering, the other half used to care for Ava. He considered it partial recompense for his daughter's actions. Ava remained mentally unstable, constantly cradling a pillow and humming a lullaby. Sleep now, my child, sleep tight, while mother bears her endless plight. Human hearts are dark and deep, karma's wheel its secrets keep.